sweet and nauseating, enveloping my throat like a deadly embrace. My body shook uncontrollably as I watched the man in front of me beg for his life, but I no longer had control over what would happen next. The scent poured out of my pores like sweat, intensifying with every beat of my racing heart. "Please, boy, I have a family," he whispered, but his words were lost in the roar that began to grow inside me. Magnus stood there, leaning against the crumbling brick wall of the abandoned factory, watching with those ice-blue eyes that never showed surprise or horror. Only satisfaction. His gloved hands adjusted the cuffs of his immaculate dress shirt, as if we were at a business meeting and not in what remained of what was once the industrial heart of Detroit. "Kai," he said in that calm voice that always managed to calm me down, "the man made his choice when he decided to follow you here." My hands burst into flames, literally. The flames danced between my fingers like living creatures fueled by the smell of fuel my own body had produced. I wanted to stop. I wanted to explain that this wasn't what I wanted, but my mouth no longer obeyed the commands of my rational mind. The man's scream echoed through the rusted metal structures, mingling with the sound of the biting wind whistling through the wreckage of a dead industrial era. And then, silence. Magnus approached, stepping carefully over the debris and placed a firm hand on my shoulder. "Excellent work, brother," but I knew there was nothing excellent about it. There was only the lingering smell of gasoline that continued to emanate from me, reminding me that I was a monster disguised as a 21-year-old boy. My name is Kai Brennan, and I was born with the smell of the storm running through my veins. Detroit has always been a city of violent contrasts. Gleaming skyscrapers sharing space with crumbling buildings, gentrified neighborhoods just feet away from vacant lots overgrown with weeds. It was in this urban maze of hope and decay that I had learned to live, navigating between extremes like someone who never quite belonged to either world. The abandoned Ford factory where Magnus and I had set up our refuge was an iron and concrete, memorial to Detroit's golden age. Its smokestacks rose against the gray sky like accusing fingers, reminding everyone that greatness was temporary. The empty corridors echoed with the ghosts of workers who had once built America's future, and now served as home to rats, addicts, and two lost souls who had found in each other something they couldn't name. I woke up that October morning with the taste of gasoline in my mouth. It was always like this when the nightmares came, fragmented visions of burned faces, screams mingling with the roar of flames, and always, those blue eyes watching me with approval. Magnus never showed horror at what I was capable of. In fact, he seemed to feed off it, as if my monstrosity validated something dark inside him. "Good morning, Kai." His voice cut through the morning mist seeping through the broken windows. Magnus was already dressed, impeccable black suit, polished shoes, hair combed with military precision. He looked like he had stepped out of a fashion magazine, not an abandoned factory in the middle of nowhere. "Did you sleep?" I asked, rubbing my eyes. My hands trembled slightly, and I felt the first trace of that familiar scent beginning to form. "Sleep is for those with a clear conscience," he replied, adjusting his shirt cuffs. "And we both know that's not the case with us." He was right. It was never the case with us. Magnus approached the panoramic window overlooking the abandoned industrial district. From there, we could see the metal skeletons of other factories. Warehouses that once housed thousands of workers, now serving only as reminders that even empires fall. The faint light of the morning sun filtered through the pollution, creating an orange glow that made everything look like it was perpetually on fire. "We had visitors last night," he said without turning around. "3 men in suits driving a black sedan. They parked 2 blocks away and watched for 4 hours. My stomach clenched. Them? Possibly. Magnus finally turned, and I saw something in those icy eyes that rarely appeared. Genuine concern. Or maybe just curious locals who heard the rumors about the fire demon haunting the industrial ruins. I rose from the pile of old mattresses that served as my bed, feeling my muscles protest. The flame tattoos on my left arm seemed to pulse with a life of their own, reacting to my heightened emotional state. I pulled on a faded t-shirt and the leather jacket that had become my second skin. "We need to get out of here," I muttered. But Magnus shook his head. "Running away isn't the answer, Kai. It never has been." He walked over to a makeshift table made of wooden crates where he kept his trophies, personal items he had collected over the years. A leather wallet, a gold watch, a wedding ring. I never asked where they came from, though I knew each item had a dark history. "Then what is the solution?" I asked, smelling gasoline beginning to intensify. It was always like this when I got anxious. My body betrayed my emotions, producing the fuel that fed my curse. Magnus smiled, and it was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "The solution, my dear friend, is to give them exactly what they expect from us." It was noon when we decided to leave the refuge. Detroit in the fall had a melancholy beauty that I had learned to appreciate. The trees shed their leaves in shades of red and gold, creating a crunchy carpet beneath our feet as we walked through the semi-deserted streets of the industrial district. The wind carried the smells of rust, burnt, tires, and something else, a promise of rain that made my skin tingle. Magnus walked beside me with the upright posture of someone who had never doubted his place in the world. People on the street instinctively moved away when they saw him approaching, even without knowing why. There was something about him, a predatory aura disguised by refined manners, that made people's primitive instincts scream in alarm. "Do you feel that?" I asked, watching as a woman quickly crossed to the other side of the street when she saw us. "Fear?" Magnus smiled, adjusting the cuffs of his dress shirt. "I always do. It's the most honest scent there is." We headed toward the city center, where Detroit's contrasts became more apparent. Trendy cafes occupied the ground floors of buildings whose upper stories were abandoned, elaborate street art decorated walls with boarded-up windows. It was a city struggling to reinvent itself while carrying the scars of its industrial past. In the central market, we stopped at a small, cozy cafe. Magnus ordered a double espresso. I just asked for water. Eating or drinking anything when I was nervous could intensify the smell of gasoline my body produced, and I could already feel the first traces of it forming. "Tell me about the men from yesterday," Magnus said, studying the movement of the street through the window. "I didn't see anyone, but you felt them, didn't you?" He turned to look at me directly. "I know when you're being watched, Kai. You tense up, the scent gets stronger, your tattoos start to look like they're moving." He was right. I had felt something the night before, a sense of being analyzed, dissected by the stares of strangers. It was a feeling I knew well, the same one that had preceded every other encounter with people who wanted to use my powers for their own ends. "They arrived around 11, I admitted. They stayed in the black van parked near the junkyard. I could smell the cigarettes they were smoking mixed with something chemical, medicinal." Magnus nodded as if this confirmed his suspicions. "Government agents, probably from the same program that tried to recruit me years ago." This was the first time he had mentioned anything about his military past beyond vague references. I leaned forward, interested, but he raised a hand to silence me. "3 men just walked in," he whispered, his lips barely moving. "Identical, suits, military posture, eyes constantly darting around. Don't look." But I could already sense them. The smell of gasoline began to seep out of my pores more intensely, an involuntary response to the perceived threat. My hands trembled slightly, and I hid them under the table. "Breathe," Magnus said calmly. "Control is power, remember?" The men sat down at a nearby table, pretending to study the menu, but I could see from the reflections in the window that their eyes were fixed on us. One of them spoke quietly into an almost invisible earpiece. "They know," I whispered. "Of course they do," Magnus replied, smiling slightly. "The question is, what are they going to do with that knowledge?" As if in answer to his question, one of the men stood up and began walking toward us. He was tall and athletic, with graying hair cut in a military style and eyes that seemed to have seen too much. When he stopped beside our table, the smell of gasoline emanating from me intensified so much that several people in the cafe began to look around, confused. "Kai Brennan," he said, and his voice had the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "My name is Agent Morrison. I'd like to have a talk with you." Magnus didn't move, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. His fingers drummed silently on the table, a code we had developed over the years. 3 taps, imminent danger. 5 taps, prepare to flee. He tapped 7 times, prepare for elimination. "I'm sorry, Agent," Magnus said with icy politeness, "but my friend is not interested in talking to strangers." Morrison smiled, but it was a smile without warmth. "I don't believe you have a choice in the matter, Mr. Volkov. We know everything about you both. Your nighttime activities, your little accidents, the impressive collection of personal items you keep as trophies." The silence that followed was heavy as lead. Magnus stood motionless for a moment that seemed to last an eternity, then rose slowly, adjusting his jacket with precise movements. "Kai," he said softly, "I believe it's time we went." The smell of gasoline was now so strong that some people began to cough. My hands grew warm, and I saw small flames dancing between my fingers. Morrison took a step back, but didn't seem surprised. "You can't run forever," he said. "And frankly, gentlemen, you don't want to find out what happens when we decide to stop asking nicely." Magnus smiled, and it was the most terrifying smile I had ever seen. "Agent Morrison, you make a fundamental mistake in assuming that we are the ones who should be afraid." And then he did something that made my blood run cold. He pulled a business card from his pocket and placed it carefully on the table. It was a simple card, black with gold lettering, containing only a name and a phone number. "When you're ready for a real conversation," Morrison said, picking up the card, "give me a call, but don't take too long. Our patience has limits." He turned and left, followed by the other 2 men. The cafe gradually returned to normal, although I could see that some people were still looking in our direction with discomfort. "Magnus," I whispered, "what just happened?" He sat down again, smoothing his hair with one of his gloved hands. "We've just been made an offer, my dear friend. An offer that will change everything." When I looked into his ice blue eyes, I saw something that frightened me more than any threat from the agents: anticipation. Magnus was excited by the prospect of what was to come, and I knew that couldn't be good for anyone. "So, supernatural youth, what do you think?" Kai is clearly in an impossible situation, caught between his uncontrollable powers and Magnus's questionable protection. And now these mysterious agents have shown up with promises and threats. Can you feel the tension building? Because I can guarantee you this is just the beginning. Detroit has secrets buried in its steel foundations, and our young protagonist is about to discover that not all monsters breathe fire. The silence that followed after the agents left was deafening. Magnus remained seated for several long minutes, his fingers drumming complex rhythms on the stained wooden table. I knew him well enough to know that behind that mask of calculated calm, his mind was processing scenarios, analyzing possibilities, planning moves I couldn't even imagine. "We need to go back," I muttered, smelling gasoline still lingering around me like a toxic cloud. "If they know where we are, they've always known where we are, Kai." Magnus finally looked at me, and there was something different in his eyes, an intensity I hadn't seen in months. The question is why they chose to reveal themselves now. We left the cafe in silence, walking through the streets of Detroit, with paranoia itching our skin like an infection. Every shadow seemed to hide a watcher. Every parked car could contain agents waiting. Autumn had dyed the city with dead colors: bloody reds, sickly yellows, rusty browns. It was as if Detroit was rotting from the inside out, just as I felt was happening to me. When we arrived at the abandoned factory, Magnus went straight to his office, a corner he had turned into something out of a film noir, complete. With an oak desk he had salvaged from a demolished building, cracked leather chairs, and meticulously organized files. He opened a drawer I had never seen before and pulled out a folder yellowed by time. "Sit down," he said, pointing to the chair across from the desk. "It's time you knew the truth." My stomach clenched. What truth? Magnus opened the folder, revealing photographs, official documents with government stamps, and yellowed newspaper clippings. The first photo he placed on the table made my world collapse. It was my family, my parents, my younger sister. All killed in the fire that had destroyed our home 5 years ago. But these photos weren't of the victims. They were from before. Surveillance photos, taken from a distance, showing our ordinary family life. The Prometheus Program, Magnus said, his voice devoid of emotion. A top-secret military project designed to identify and capture individuals with unusual abilities. Your name has been on the list since you were 16. My hands began to shake. The smell of gasoline intensified, filling the space between us. How do you know this? Because I was part of the program. He turned a page, revealing his own military file. Magnus Volkov, Target Acquisition Specialist, Top Secret Classification. My specialty was convincing people like you to cooperate voluntarily. I stood up so quickly that the chair fell backward. You were hunting people like me? It was my job, yes. Magnus stood up too, but kept the table between us. Until I met your family and realized I had found something much more valuable than a simple target. Flames began to dance between my fingers. The room temperature rose several degrees in seconds. What did you do to my family? I protected them for as long as I could, he said. And for the first time since I had known him, I saw something like remorse in his eyes. But the program was losing patience. They were coming for you anyway, and your family would have been classified as an unnecessary complication. Answer my question, I roared, and flames spread across my arms. What did you do? Magnus closed his eyes for a moment. I started the fire. The world stopped. For a moment that seemed to last an eternity, I couldn't process the words. They floated in the air between us like something physical and poisonous. Then, reality hit me like a punch in the stomach. You killed them! The words came out as a hoarse whisper. You killed my family. I set them free, Magnus said, his voice returning to that terrifying calm. They were going to torture your parents to force you to cooperate. They were going to use your sister as collateral. I gave them a quick death instead of years of suffering. The flames exploded from me like a bomb. Furniture caught fire. The metal walls turned red with heat. The air became unbreathable. Magnus didn't move, just stood there as the inferno I had created roared around us. 5 years! I shouted through the flames. 5 years of pretending to be my friend! 5 years of lies! They weren't lies, Kai. His voice remained, steady even as sweat dripped down his face from the heat. Everything I felt for you was real. Everything I did to protect you was real. Protect? I laughed, and it was a crazy broken laugh. You destroyed my life. I saved your life, he shouted back, and it was the first time I heard him lose control. Do you think you would have survived at their hands? Do you think you could live knowing that your family was being tortured because of you? I stopped feeding the flames, but the fire continued to burn around us, fueled by the flammable materials in the factory. Magnus took advantage of the moment, of hesitation to continue. They offered me a choice, he said more calmly. Hand you over voluntarily and allow them to use your family as motivation, or eliminate the complications and ensure that you were free to make your own choices. That wasn't your decision to make. No, it wasn't. He nodded, and I saw tears forming in his ice-blue eyes. But I made it because I fell in love with you. The words hit me like a bucket of cold water. What? Not romantically, he said quickly. Like a brother. Like the family I never had after my own parents died in Chernobyl. I saw in you someone who needed to be protected, even if that meant protecting you from myself. The fire around us began to die, leaving only smoke and the acrid smell of melted plastic. I sat heavily on the ground, feeling as if all the strength had been drained from my body. Why are you telling me this now? I asked, my voice just a whisper. Magnus approached cautiously and knelt in front of me. Because they're coming back, and this time, they won't take no for an answer. An hour passed before I could look at Magnus again. We sat in silence among the smoldering wreckage of what had been our refuge. The air was still heavy with smoke, and the lingering smell of gasoline that my body continued to produce. My emotions were a chaotic storm: anger, betrayal, confusion, and something deeper that I didn't want to name. "There's more," Magnus said eventually, his voice broken. "About what they want with you now." I didn't answer, just watched him as he retrieved some documents that had survived my outburst. His hands trembled slightly, the first time I'd ever seen him show any sign of real vulnerability. "The Prometheus Program has evolved," he continued. "It's no longer about capturing people like you, it's about creating more people like you." That caught my attention. "What do you mean?" Magnus held out a photo. It was of an ultra-modern laboratory filled with equipment I couldn't identify, and people in white coats. In the center was something that made my blood run cold. A chair that looked more like a torture device, surrounded by machines pulsing with electric blue light. "They've figured out how to replicate abilities," he said. "Extract the essence of what makes you special and implant it into normal soldiers. Imagine an entire army of people capable of manipulating fire, or ice, or electricity. And they need me to do it. You're the perfect example. Your powers are stable, controlled by a specific trigger, and devastatingly effective. They want to study you, dissect you, figure out exactly how your connection to the element works." I stood up and walked over to the broken window. Outside, Detroit continued its daily existence, unaware of the horrors lurking in its shadows. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that monsters like me roamed among them. "What if I turn myself in?" I asked. "If I cooperate, will they leave other people alone?" Magnus laughed, but it was a bitter laugh. "Kai, do you really think they'll stop after they get what they want? This is just the beginning. There will be others like you. Other families destroyed, other lives shattered in the name of national security." I turned to face him. "Then what's the alternative? Do we keep running forever?" "No." Magnus stood up and walked over to a cabinet I had never seen him open before. From inside, he took out something that made my heart stop. A small vial filled with a bright blue liquid that seemed to pulsate with its own light. "There is a third option." "What is it?" "Prometheus suppressor," he said, holding the vial with almost reverent care. "A chemical compound that can permanently remove supernatural abilities. One dose, and you become completely normal." I stared at the vial, feeling a mixture of hope and terror spreading through my chest. "Where did you get this?" "I borrowed it when I left the program." Magnus placed the vial carefully on the table. "I thought you might want to choose a normal life someday." "And it works?" "It's been tested. It's irreversible." He looked me straight in the eye. "But there's a catch." Of course there was. "What is it?" "If you take this, you'll just be a normal human trying to survive an ultra-secret military organization that knows exactly who you are and where to find you." Magnus paused. "And you'd be doing that without me." "Without you? Kai, the only reason I allowed myself to develop feelings for you, the only reason I betrayed my own government and spent 5 years living in this hole, was because you made me feel needed." His voice grew lower, more vulnerable. "I'm a functional psychopath. I don't feel empathy for normal people. But you made me feel something like love." The silence stretched between us like an abyss. I could hear my own heart beating. I could smell the gasoline intensifying again as my emotions became more complicated. "You're saying that if I become normal, I'll probably go back to being the monster I've always been," Magnus finished. "And you'll just be another ordinary person I could manipulate or eliminate without hesitation." Jesus Christ. "Magnus?" "I know." He sat down heavily, running his hands through his perfectly combed hair. "I know this is horrible, but you deserve to know the truth before you make your decision." I picked up the vial, feeling its surprising lightness in my hands. The blue liquid swirled gently as if it were alive. What if I don't take it? If we keep my powers and face the program? Magnus looked up, and I saw a spark of the predator I had always suspected was inside him. Then we show them why it's a bad idea to hunt monsters. You're talking about killing people. I'm talking about survival. He stood up and walked toward me. I'm talking about making sure no other child goes through what you went through. I'm talking about turning the hunters into the hunted. I looked at the vial in my hands, then at Magnus, then at the window where Detroit stretched out in all its decaying glory. 3 options: surrender to the program and become a test subject, take the suppressor and live a normal life on the run, or keep my powers and declare war on forces I couldn't even begin to imagine. How long do I have to decide? Magnus consulted an expensive watch that had survived the fire. Agent Morrison said their patience has limits. My experience with the program tells me we have maybe 48 hours before they stop asking nicely. And after that? After that, they send in the exterminators. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Terminators? Soldiers specially trained to capture or eliminate supernatural targets. They don't negotiate. They don't take prisoners, and they definitely don't care about collateral damage. Magnus approached the window and looked outside. If they send the Terminators, it means they've decided you're too valuable to leave alive if they can't have you. I closed my eyes and tried to process all the information. My entire life had been a lie. The man I considered my best friend had killed my family. A secret government organization wanted to turn me into a weapon, and now I had to choose between becoming a normal human living a life on the run or becoming a monster declaring war on my own government. Supernatural youth people, I muttered to myself. Can you imagine a more impossible choice? Magnus looked at me strangely. Who are you talking to? No one. I slid the vial back onto the table. Just thinking out loud about how some decisions can change everything. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, painting the Detroit sky with shades of blood red. Soon it would be night, and I knew that when the sun rose again, my life would be completely different. The only question was, would it be different as a normal human on the run, or as a monster at war? The smell of a storm was in the air, and I could feel it coming fast. Night fell over Detroit like a shroud. I hadn't been able to sleep. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the face of my younger sister, Sarah, smiling at me in the last family photo we had taken. She was only 12 when she died, 12 years old, and she would never know that the brother she adored was the reason. She had burned to death. Magnus sat across the factory floor, motionless as a statue. Since our conversation, he hadn't moved, just sat there watching the city through the broken window. Occasionally, I caught him looking at me, and in those moments, his ice-blue eyes seemed to be assessing, calculating, as if trying to determine which version of me would emerge from this crisis. The vial containing the Prometheus suppressant sat on the table between us, its bright blue contents pulsing softly in the darkness. It was mesmerizing in a disturbing way. That small container held the power to transform me into a completely different person. A normal person. A person who would never again smell gasoline rising from their skin, never again see flames dancing between their fingers. A person who might be able to sleep without dreaming of screams. You're thinking about taking it, Magnus said without turning from the window. How can you know? The smell is fading. He finally looked at me. When you're determined to do something, your powers calm down. It's as if your body knows a decision has been made. He was right. I could feel the difference. The constant scent of gasoline that had accompanied me had reduced to almost nothing. It was as if my own body was preparing to say goodbye to its supernatural nature. What if I do it? I asked. What if I take the suppressant and just disappear? Magnus stood up and walked over to me with that predatory grace that had always characterized him. Then you'll spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, knowing they're still out. They're looking for you. And without your powers, you won't be able to defend yourself when they find you. But I'd be free of them, free of you, free of this life. Would you? He sat down in the chair across from me, and I saw something that rarely appeared. On his face, genuine pain. Kai, you can take away the powers, but you can't take away the memories. You can't take away the guilt. You can't take away the feeling that every normal person you meet could be another agent in disguise. His words hit me like punches. Are you trying to convince me not to take it? I'm trying to make you understand that there is no easy choice here. Magnus leaned forward. Whichever path you choose will require sacrifices you may not be prepared to make. Before I could respond, a low, steady sound began to reverberate through the factory structure. It was almost subsonic, a vibration I could feel in my bones before I actually heard it. Magnus tensed instantly. Helicopters! We rushed to the window and looked up at the night sky. 3 points of light were rapidly approaching, flying, low and with no visible navigation lights. Military helicopters, the kind that didn't appear on the news. They didn't wait 48 hours, I muttered. No. Magnus was already moving, grabbing a backpack he kept ready. They must have detected the heat from your outburst earlier. Shit, I should have seen this coming. The sound of the helicopters was getting louder, closer. Through the windows, I could see searchlights beginning to sweep the industrial district, moving systematically from building to building. We have to get out of here, Magnus said, throwing me a jacket. Now! But I didn't move. Instead, I stared at the vial on the table. What if I take it now? What if I become normal before they get here? Kai, there's no time. Answer me, I shouted, and I smelled gasoline coming back in full force. What if I take it now? Magnus stopped and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Then you'll become a defenseless civilian being hunted by soldiers specialized in eliminating supernatural targets. They won't stop just because you no longer have powers. They'll kill you anyway, just to be sure. The helicopters were almost on top of us now. I could hear the sound of ropes being thrown, boots hitting the metal roof, voices shouting commands in military code I didn't understand. Choose, Kai, Magnus said, holding out his hand. We'll run away together, or you'll die here like a normal human. I looked at his outstretched hand, then at the vial, then at the shadows beginning to move outside the windows. Soldiers were descending the outer walls of the factory like mechanical spiders, surrounding our position with military precision. And then I made the choice that would change everything. I took the vial. Kai, no! But I had already removed the cap. The bright blue liquid gave off a sweet medicinal scent that made my head spin instantly. This was it. One small dose, and I would be free of everything. The powers, the guilt, the responsibility of being a monster. Magnus lunged toward me, but it was too late. I had already brought the vial to my lips when the windows exploded. Soldiers dressed in black burst through every opening simultaneously, descending on ropes, exploding through doors I didn't even know existed. Their weapons were pointed directly at me, red laser lights dancing across my chest like tiny dots of death. "Drop the weapon!" shouted an amplified voice. "Drop the weapon and put your hands up!" For a surreal moment, I laughed. Weapon? The vial in my hand was the only weapon that mattered, not against them, but against myself. Kai, said a familiar voice. Agent Morrison emerged from among the soldiers, removing a military helmet. Slowly step away from the vial. Why? I asked, feeling the blue liquid sway gently in the container. Afraid I'll become too normal for you? Morrison smiled, but it was a cold smile. On the contrary, we're afraid you'll accidentally kill yourself before we can study you properly. To hell with studying, I began, but Magnus appeared beside me like a ghost. That's not a suppressor, he said quietly, and there was something in his voice that made my blood run cold. What did you say? The real suppressor was light blue, almost transparent. Magnus didn't take his eyes off Morrison. That one is electric blue, too bright. Morrison laughed. Very good, Mr. Volkov. You've always been observant. Then, what is it? I asked, feeling panic begin to form in my chest. The Prometheus accelerator, Morrison said casually, as if he were discussing the weather. Instead of removing your powers, it amplifies them approximately 1,000 times. For about 15 minutes, you would become powerful enough to melt half of Detroit. The vial shook in my hand. And then? Then your body would disintegrate. From the stress. But not before you killed thousands of innocent people. Morrison took a step toward me. So what's it going to be, Mr. Brennan? Are you going to drink this and become the monster you've always feared you were? Or are you going to come with us voluntarily? Magnus was tense as a coiled spring beside me. I could see his muscles twitching, preparing for something. How many soldiers? He muttered. 12 visible, I whispered back. Probably more in the shadows. They can handle you in normal mode. They can't handle me if I really want to hurt them. It was true. Magnus might be only human, but he was a human trained to kill in ways I couldn't even imagine. The problem was that against 12 armed soldiers, even he would have a hard time. Last chance, Morrison said. Come voluntarily, and we guarantee that no civilians will be harmed in the process. Keep resisting, and we'll start eliminating witnesses within a 5-block radius. You're monsters, I said. We're patriots, Morrison corrected. And you're a national resource. We'd prefer to keep you intact, but if necessary, we'll collect what's left after your self-destruction. It was then that I understood the real trap. They hadn't come here to capture me. They had come here to force me to use the accelerator. They wanted to study my body after disintegration, to learn from the remains. That was why they had replaced the real suppressor. Magnus, I said quietly. I know. His voice was cold. They never intended to let us live. Time's up, said Morrison, and gave a signal with his hand. The soldiers advanced simultaneously, but Magnus was already moving. He grabbed the heavy oak table and threw it with enough force to knock down 3 soldiers. In the same motion, he ripped an iron bar from the factory structure and used it as a weapon, moving through the attackers like a force of nature. It was simultaneously beautiful and terrifying. Magnus didn't waste a movement. Every blow was calculated to incapacitate or kill. Within seconds, half the soldiers were on the floor, moaning or motionless, but that left me alone with Morrison and the vial in my hand. You really want to see what happens when I drink this? I asked. Morrison smiled. Actually, yes. It'll be fascinating from a scientific standpoint. You're psychopaths. We're necessary. He pointed a pistol at me. And you're expendable. The choice is yours. Slow death in our laboratories or quick death as a human bomb. I looked at the vial, then at Magnus fighting the remaining soldiers, then at Morrison, with his gun pointed at me. 3 options, all bad. And then I remembered something Magnus had said earlier. The key is to give them exactly what they expect from us. They expected me to drink the accelerant, or to surrender and become a test subject. But there was a third option they hadn't considered. I smiled at Morrison and saw confusion form in his eyes. You know what? I said, smelling gasoline exploding from me with renewed force. I choose option number 4. And then I threw the bottle at the wall behind Morrison, where it shattered into 1,000 sparkling fragments. What happened next was like awakening a sleeping demon. The blue liquid spread through the air like a toxic mist, and the moment I inhaled, my world exploded into flames. But this time, I was in control. The explosion of power that hit me was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It wasn't gradual like my normal outbursts of rage. It was instantaneous, violent, absolute. The smell of gasoline that normally emanated from me turned into something much more intense. Crude oil, naphtha, every form of fuel that has ever existed, oozing from every pore of my skin as if I were a human refinery. But contrary to what Morrison expected, I didn't lose control. The accelerator had amplified my powers, yes, but it had also amplified my awareness of them. It was as if I could finally see the full extent of what I was capable of. Impossible, Morrison muttered, instinctively backing away. I stood up and the flames rose with me like extensions of my body. But these weren't the orange and yellow flames of ordinary fire. They were blue, white, violet, colors that indicated temperatures that shouldn't be possible for human flesh to withstand. "You wanted a monster," I said, and my voice echoed, with the roar of the flames. "Now you have one." Morrison fired his gun. The bullets disintegrated before they even touched me, melted by the heat radiating from my body. Behind him, the remaining soldiers began to retreat, their weapons useless against something that had transcended the normal laws of physics. Magnus had stopped fighting and was watching me with an expression I had never seen before. It wasn't fear. Magnus was incapable of feeling real fear. It was admiration, as if he was seeing something he had always known existed but had never witnessed. "Kai," he said, and his voice was filled with something akin to pride. "You are magnificent." I walked toward Morrison, and the metal floor melted beneath my feet, creating footprints of molten iron. The agent tried to back away, but his back was already against the wall. "Please," he said, and for the first time I heard real fear in his voice. "We can negotiate." "Negotiate?" I laughed, and the sound was like the roar of a furnace. "How did you negotiate with my family? How did you negotiate with all the other families you destroyed?" I reached out my hand toward him, and Morrison began to scream before the flames even touched him. The heat emanating from me was enough to burn without direct contact. He writhed against the wall, his skin turning red, his hair beginning to crackle. "Kai." Magnus's voice cut through my anger like a cold blade. "Stop!" "Why?" I asked, not taking my eyes off Morrison. "He deserves to die." "Yes, he does." Magnus walked over to stand beside me. "But not like this. Not out of anger. That's what they want. To turn us into impulsive monsters who destroy without thinking." He was right. I could feel it now, with terrifying clarity. The rage consuming me wasn't mine. It was something the accelerator had amplified along with my powers, an artificial rage designed to make me lose control. I took a deep breath and began to pull the flames back inside me. It was like trying to swallow lava, but gradually I managed to lower the temperature around me. Morrison collapsed to the ground, still alive but severely burned. "Very good," Magnus said, and there was genuine satisfaction in his voice. "Now you understand." "Understand? What?" "That power without control is just destruction, but power with control." He smiled, and it was the most dangerous smile I had ever seen. "That is true freedom." I looked around at the fallen soldiers, at Morrison moaning on the floor, at the smoking wreckage our battle had created. The effects of the accelerator were beginning to wear off, but I could feel that something fundamental had changed in me. It was as if a door had been opened in my mind, revealing possibilities I had never considered. "What do we do now?" I asked. Magnus approached Morrison and knelt beside him. "Now, my dear friend, we send a message." He took Morrison's military headset and adjusted it to his own ear. "Hello? Yes, this is the scene of the incident. Agent Morrison is alive but incapacitated. The operation was a complete failure." There was a pause as he listened to the response. "I see. Yes, they got away. No, we don't know where they went." Magnus looked at me and winked. "But I can give you some free advice on your next approach." Another pause. "Leave us alone." His voice became cold, deadly. "Because the next time you send soldiers after us, we won't leave any alive to tell the story." He removed the earpiece and crushed it under his foot. "There," he said. "Now they know the rules have changed." Outside, I could hear the sound of helicopters flying away. Apparently, whoever was in charge had decided that a strategic retreat was preferable to losing more men. "What now?" I asked. Magnus walked over to the window and looked out at the city stretching beyond it. "Now we prepare for war, Kai. Because after what happened here today, they won't stop until they destroy us." He turned to look at me, and there was something new in his eyes, a gleam that I recognized as the reflection of my own transformation. "But the good news is that we are no longer the same people they were hunting. We are something much more dangerous." "What are we?" Magnus smiled, and it was a smile that promised storms. We are proof that hunters can become the hunted. Outside, Detroit glowed under the nightlights, unaware of the war that had begun in its shadows. But I could feel the change in the air, a storm approaching, and this time we would be the eye of the hurricane. The smell of gasoline still emanated from me, but now it was different. Controlled, focused, powerful. It was the smell of freedom. 3 days had passed since our declaration of war. Detroit had become our fortress and our battlefield. Magnus had taught me to use the abandoned subway tunnels, the ruined buildings, the entire dead infrastructure of the city as an extension of our senses. We were urban ghosts, appearing only to eliminate isolated patrols from the Prometheus Program before disappearing again into the shadows. But I should have known they were just letting us think we were winning. I woke up on the morning of the 4th day to a different smell in the air. Not gasoline, blood. Lots of blood coming from somewhere nearby, but not immediately. Magnus wasn't in our new refuge, an abandoned bus depot on the east side of town. "Magnus?" I called, but only the echo of my own voice answered. I found a note on the table where he used to plan our movements. His handwriting was perfect, as always, but there was something different about the pressure of the pen, stronger, more urgent. "Kai, I went to check reports of unusual activity in the financial district. If I'm not back by noon, assume I've been compromised. The emergency plan is in the blue drawer. Don't come after me. M." Noon had passed 2 hours ago. I knew I should follow his instructions. Magnus had always been meticulous about security protocols, and he had made it clear that if anything happened to him, I should prioritize my own survival. But the idea of abandoning him made me feel physically sick. He had killed my family, yes. But he had also spent 5 years protecting me, teaching me, being the only constant in a world that seemed determined to destroy me. And now, for the first time since I had known him, he was gone. I completely disregarded his instructions and went out to look for him. Detroit's financial district was a strange museum of lost greatness. Abandoned skyscrapers rose like broken fingers against the gray sky, their empty windows reflecting nothing but emptiness. This was where the Prometheus Program had set up its temporary base of operations. Ironic, considering they were using the remnants of American capitalism to hunt down the products of secret government experiments. I found signs of a struggle. 2 blocks before reaching the main building. Burn marks on the asphalt where Magnus had used a makeshift incendiary bomb. Splatters of blood on a wall, not enough to be fatal, but enough to indicate that someone had been injured. And then I found his glove. It was black leather, expensive, the kind Magnus wore religiously. It was torn and stained with blood, tossed in an alley like trash. My stomach clenched when I realized there was more blood on the ground around it. Much more blood than the previous marks had indicated. "He's alive," said a voice behind me. I spun around, flames already beginning to dance between my fingers, and came face to face with a woman I had never seen before. She was tall and thin, with gray hair pulled back into a severe ponytail. She was wearing the same type of black suit as the agents, but there was something different about her, an authority that went beyond military rank. "Who are you?" I asked, smelling gasoline beginning to intensify. "Dr. Elizabeth Chen, director of the Prometheus Program." She showed no fear of the flames growing around me. "And before you do anything rash, I suggest you hear what I have to say about your friend." "Where is he?" "Safe. For now." She took a tablet out of her pocket and showed me an image that made my world collapse. Magnus was strapped to a metal chair in a room I recognized from the documents he had shown me, the Prometheus Program laboratory. But it wasn't just the location that terrified me, it was his condition. His arms and legs were connected to machines that pulsed with electrical energy. His immaculate dress shirt was torn and bloodied, but worst of all was his face. His ice blue eyes, which never showed any real emotion, were wide with terror. "What are you doing to him?" "Experimenting," Chen said casually. "We discovered something fascinating about Mr. Volkov during our investigation of you two. He's not entirely human." The flames around me flared higher. "What do you mean?" His parents did indeed die in Chernobyl, but it wasn't radiation that killed them. It was something much more interesting. Chen swiped to another image on the tablet. They were part of a Soviet experiment in controlled genetic mutation. Magnus inherited some modifications. The image showed a medical file in Russian, with photographs of people who looked normal at first glance, but there was something wrong with their eyes. The same cold, calculating gaze I had seen in Magnus 1,000 times. What kind of modifications? Enhanced empathic abilities, altered emotional functioning, improved resistance to psychological trauma. In layman's terms, he was genetically engineered to be a functional psychopath. Chen smiled. But here's the interesting part. Our research indicates that these modifications only work fully in the presence of a specific supernatural energy field. My stomach sank. My energy field. Exactly. The Magnus you know only exists because you're near him. Without you, he reverts to, well, something much less stable. She showed another image. Magnus was in the same chair, but this time, he was screaming. Not a scream of physical pain, a scream of mental agony, as if his own mind was falling apart. You're torturing him. We're studying neural degradation in real time. It's fascinating, really. Every hour he spends away from you, he loses more of his artificial humanity. In about 12 hours, he'll be completely feral. The flames exploded from me with such force that the windows of nearby buildings shattered. I'm going to kill you! No, you won't. Chen remained calmly where she stood, seemingly immune to the heat radiating from my body. Because if you hurt me, you'll never find out where he is, and without exact coordinates, you'll never be able to navigate our security complex before. His neural degradation becomes irreversible. She was right, and we both knew it. What do you want? A simple exchange. You surrender yourself voluntarily for research, and we release Magnus with most of his mental faculties intact. Chen put away the tablet. You have 6 hours to decide. After that, well, let's just say you won't recognize what's left of him. How do I know you'll honor the agreement? You don't. But consider this. If we let Magnus deteriorate completely, we lose a valuable source of data on interaction between modified humans and the supernatural. It's in our best interest to keep him functional. She turned to leave, but paused and looked back over her shoulder. Oh, and Kai, don't try anything heroic. Our complex was designed specifically to contain people like you. Every hallway, every door, every vent is equipped with suppressors that will nullify your powers the moment you enter, without authorization. And then she was gone, leaving me alone in the alley with Magnus's bloody glove and the terrible realization that I had lost the only person in the world who truly knew me. I spent the next 2 hours wandering aimlessly through the empty streets of Detroit. The city looked different now, no longer our fortress, but a giant prison. Every shadow could hide surveillance agents. Every abandoned building could be a trap. The place that had become our home was now infected with paranoia and despair. I could still smell Magnus's glove in my pocket. Expensive leather mixed with blood and something else. Fear. Magnus had never shown real fear before, but I could sense it in the traces of his scent that in the end, when they came for him, he was terrified. And it was my fault. If I hadn't been so impulsive, if I had listened to his warnings about not acting out of anger, if I had been more careful, Magnus wouldn't be strapped to a chair being mentally torn apart by sadistic scientists. I found myself standing in front of the last place we had ever felt safe, the original factory where it had all begun. The burn marks from my outburst were still visible on the metal, physical reminders of the first time I lost control with Magnus. It was strange how 3 days could feel like a lifetime. My phone rang. An unknown number. Hello? Kai. The voice was hoarse, distorted, but I recognized it immediately. Magnus? My heart leaped. Where are you? Are you okay? His voice faltered, and I heard something I'd never heard before. Magnus sobbing. Kai, I can't remember why I care about you. The world stopped. What do you mean? I remember the facts. I remember spending 5 years protecting you, loving you like a brother, killing your family to save you. But I can't feel it. His voice was growing colder, more distant. It's like trying to remember the color of something when you can only see in black and white. Magnus, listen to my voice. Focus on me. They told me this would happen, that without you around, I would revert to what I was before the modifications. A common sociopath with no capacity for emotional connection. He laughed, and it was an empty, terrible laugh. You know what's funny? Part of me is relieved. Don't say that. It's true. For 5 years, I carried the weight of loving someone, of caring about something other than my own survival. It was exhausting, Kai. It was like carrying a rock in my chest all the time. Tears began to stream down my face. You don't mean that. I do. And you know what's even funnier? In a few hours, when the degradation is complete, I'll look at you the way I look at every other human, as a resource to be used or an obstacle to be removed. Then let's fight this. I'll find you. No. His voice cut like a knife. You're going to turn yourself into them, Kai, because even though I can't feel why it matters anymore, I still remember that it does. And the rational, part of me that still works knows that you're the only hope this world has against what they're planning. What hope? I'm just a kid who can make fire. You're so much more than that, and deep down you know it. Magnus paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was weaker. The accelerant you used didn't just amplify your powers, it changed you fundamentally. You're no longer just someone who can manipulate fire. You're someone who can manipulate energy in its purest form. I don't understand. Fire is just the beginning. Electricity, nuclear energy, even the energy that holds molecules together, all of that is within your reach if you learn how to access it. His voice was growing weaker, more distant. Chen and his program want to use you to create an army of super soldiers. But what they don't know is that you have the potential to be far more powerful than all of them combined. Magnus. I can feel it happening, Kai. With every passing minute, I care less. Soon I'll completely forget why I ever thought you were worth saving. The line went silent for a moment, and I could hear only his heavy breathing. If you really love me, he said finally, if any part of you still considers our friendship real despite everything I've done, then do me a favor. Anything. When you come to rescue me, and I know you will because that's who you are, don't hesitate to kill me if I try to hurt you. The thing I'm going to become isn't Magnus. It's just a predator wearing his face. I can't. Promise me, Kai. Promise me you won't let the thing I become destroy the memory of what we once were. I closed my eyes, feeling tears burn my skin. I promise. Thank you. His voice was almost inaudible now. And Kai, for what? It's worth. Loving you was the only good thing I ever did in my life. The line went dead. I collapsed onto the floor of the abandoned factory, sobbing in a way I hadn't since my family died. But this time, there wasn't just sadness. There was a rage growing inside me that made my previous outbursts seem like candles compared to forest fires. Chen and his program had made a terrible choice in using Magnus against me. They thought they were forcing me to surrender. In fact, they had just awakened something I didn't even know existed inside me. When I got up from the floor 20 minutes later, I was no longer the same person who had fallen. The smell of gasoline around me had changed. Now it smelled like ozone, heated metal, pure energy. Magnus was right. The accelerator had changed more than my powers. It had changed my very essence. And now I was going to use that change to show the Prometheus Program what happens when you hurt the only person in the world someone like me is capable of loving. It took me 40 minutes to find the Prometheus Program complex. It wasn't hard. They had set up operations in what used to be the General Motors building, a 40-story glass and steel monument that dominated the Detroit skyline. It was symbolic in a twisted way. Where once the future of America was built, now the future of people like me was being destroyed. I stood in the shadow of an abandoned building across the street, observing the security patterns. Guards were positioned at precise intervals. Cameras covered every angle of approach, and motion detectors probably included sensors for supernatural energy. Chen hadn't lied about the defenses. This place was built specifically to keep people like me out. But she had made one fundamental mistake. She assumed I would try to get in. Instead, I was going to make the building come to me. I closed my eyes and focused on the sensation I had discovered after the accelerator, the ability to sense energy in all its forms. Electrical, thermal, kinetic, even the faint nuclear energy that held atoms together. The GM building was powered by an electrical substation 3 blocks away. I could feel the current flowing through underground cables like blood through veins. All that power, all that energy, just waiting to be redirected. I placed my hands on the ground and let my consciousness follow the cables to the source. The substation exploded in a cascade of blue-white light that was seen for miles around. But I didn't allow the energy to dissipate. Instead, I channeled it, directed it, focused it. All the power that would normally light up an entire block of Detroit, I forced through the electrical system of the GM building. The results were spectacular. Every light in the building came on simultaneously, shining with an intensity that turned night into day. Then they exploded one after another, raining glass and sparks onto the street below. Computer systems failed in a cascade. Elevators stopped between floors. Security systems died within seconds. But most importantly, the suppressors Chen had mentioned, the ones designed to nullify my powers, all burned out simultaneously due to the energy overload. Now the building was dark, vulnerable, and I could sense exactly where Magnus was being held. 37th floor. Lab C. Surrounded by electrical energy pulsing inconsistently, the machines that were doing something terrible to him. I crossed the street. Guards came running toward me, but they couldn't get close. The heat radiating from my body was now enough to melt concrete. Their weapons melted before they could pull the triggers. "Chen!" I shouted, and my voice echoed through the building with supernatural force. "I'm here! Let him go!" I entered the main lobby and headed straight for the emergency stairwell. 37 floors separated me from Magnus. Each step I took left melted footprints on the metal steps. On the 10th floor, they tried to stop me with soldiers. On the 20th floor, they tried tear gas. On the 30th floor, they tried an explosive barricade. Nothing worked. I was no longer just Brennan, the kid with anger issues who could make fire. I was a force of nature incarnate, a tsunami of destructive energy that swept away all obstacles. When I reached the 37th floor, Chen was waiting for me. "Impressive," she said, looking at the melted footprints I had left behind. "You exceeded even our most optimistic estimates." "Where is he?" "Just behind this door." She pointed to an armored entrance marked with radiation symbols. "But before you go in, you should know, he's not the person you used to." "No? I know." "Are you sure?" Chen smiled coldly. "In the last 4 hours, Magnus has killed 3 lab technicians and 2 guards, with his own hands. He showed no remorse, no recognition, just lethal efficiency." My stomach clenched, but I didn't stop walking toward the door. "The neural degradation is complete," Chen continued. "What's in that room is a pure predator, without conscience, without empathy, without connection to his former humanity. He will try to kill you the moment he sees you." "Then why are you telling me this?" "Because I want to watch. I want to see if you're really capable of killing the only person you've ever loved in order to save yourself." Her eyes glinted with sadistic anticipation. "It will be the ultimate test of what you've become." I stopped in front of the reinforced door and touched it. The metal began to glow red beneath my hand. "You made a mistake, Dr. Chen." "What mistake?" "You assumed I came here to save him." I turned to look at her and saw real fear form in her eyes when she saw what my face had become. "I didn't come here to save Magnus. I came here to save him from what you've turned him into." The armored door melted like butter, and on the other side, in the smoking wreckage of what had been Laboratory C, A familiar figure turned to look at me with eyes that showed no recognition. No love. No humanity. "Hello, Magnus," I said. "Let's finish this." Magnus stood in the center of the destroyed laboratory like a predator studying its prey. His ice-blue eyes, which had once shown at least a semblance of affection, now analyzed me with the calculating coldness of a killing machine. His posture was different, more rigid, more predatory. Even the way he breathed had changed, as if every movement was calibrated for maximum lethal efficiency. "Kai Brennan," he said, his voice the same but devoid of all humanity. "Primary. Target. Ultra threat level. Elimination recommended." "Magnus," I said, taking a cautious step toward him. "It's me. I know there's still something of you left inside." He tilted his head, like an animal studying something interesting. Access to previous subjects' memories confirmed. Previous emotional relationship identified as... He paused, as if consulting an internal file. Irrelevant to current operation. Behind me, I heard Chen whisper to someone, "Are you recording this? We need to document every second of this interaction." I ignored her and focused completely on Magnus. "You called me a few hours ago. You said you loved me like a brother. You said killing my family was the only good thing you ever did." "Emotional data corrupted," Magnus replied mechanically. "Neural connections responsible for interpersonal affection have been severed. Previous subject ceased to exist at 3:47 p.m. local time." But even as he spoke, I could see something different in his eyes. A glimmer, almost imperceptible, that appeared whenever I mentioned our shared memories. As if some tiny part of the real Magnus was still there, trapped inside this killing machine they had created. "Remember when we first met?" I asked, taking another step forward. "You were disguised as a social worker. You came to get me at the hospital after the fire. I had third-degree burns on my hands because I tried to save my family." Magnus blinked. For a moment, just a moment, his expression wavered. "You brought me ice cream," I continued. "Mint chocolate chip. You said it was your favorite dessert when you were a kid in Russia." "Stop." The word came out like a military command, but there was something underneath it, a crack in the mask. "You lied about who you were, about why you were there, about everything. But the ice cream was real. And when I started crying because I remembered how Sarah always stole spoonfuls from mine, you didn't say anything. You just sat with me until I stopped." I said stop. Magnus roared, and for the first time since I entered the lab, his voice sounded human. Flames exploded from me in response to his anger. It wasn't just fire anymore. It was pure energy, blue-white, hot enough to ionize the air around me. The entire lab lit up as if a small sun had been born there. Magnus moved with supernatural speed, crossing the distance between us in less than a second. His hands found my throat with lethal precision, and I felt the force that could easily break my neck. But I didn't resist. "Do it," I whispered, looking directly into his eyes. "If there's nothing left of my friend in there, then kill me. End it." His fingers tightened. I could feel my windpipe beginning to compress. But I stared into his eyes, searching for any trace of the person he had been. And then I saw it. A tear. A single tear streaming down Magnus's face as his hands tried to kill me. I can't," he whispered, his voice broken. "I can't feel why it matters, but I can't do this." His hands loosened slightly. "Kai, I remember you. I remember everything we did together. But it's like watching someone else's movie. I know it should mean something, but..." "I know," I said softly. "It's not your fault." "They broke me," he whispered. "They took the only good thing I ever had and destroyed it. And the worst part is, part of me is happy. The part that always hated having to care about anyone." Behind us, Chen was talking rapidly into a communicator. "Prepare the containment unit. We're going to need both subjects for comparative analysis." Magnus heard this and his face hardened again. "They're going to use us, Kai. They're going to use what we are to create things far worse." "I know." "Then you know what you have to do." I looked into his eyes and saw for a moment a glimpse of the man who had protected me for 5 years. The man who had sacrificed his own humanity to keep me safe. The man who had loved me the only way he knew how. "There's another option," I said. "What is it?" I smiled and felt energy begin to build inside me. Not just heat, not just fire, but something much more fundamental. The force that held atoms together, the energy that fueled stars. We give them exactly what they want. "Back off!" Chen shouted, finally realizing what was happening. "Everyone get off the floor, now!" But it was too late. I reached out to Magnus with both hands, and the moment we touched, something extraordinary happened. The energy pulsing inside me found something similar in him, an echo of the genetic modifications his parents had received in Chernobyl. It wasn't supernatural in the way my powers were. It was something different, more subtle. But when our energy met, it created a resonance I had never experienced before. Suddenly, I could feel everything Magnus felt. The empty coldness where his emotions used to be, the confusion of knowing he should care about me but being unable to access those feelings. And underneath it all, a constant, terrible pain, the pain of losing the only thing that made him feel human. And he could feel what I felt. The anger that burned inside me like a nuclear engine. The love I still had for him, despite everything he had done, and something else. A fierce determination to make sure no one else ever went through what we had. "This is impossible," Chen muttered, watching as visible energy danced between us. "The readings are off the charts. What are you doing?" "Becoming what you've always feared," Magnus said, and his voice sounded different now. Stronger, more human. "A weapon you can't control." The energy between us intensified. I could feel my consciousness expanding, connecting with electrical systems, not just in this building, but throughout the city. Every power line, every circuit, every electronic device, everything was within my reach. And through my connection to Magnus, I could access something more. His ability to analyze, strategize, predict human movement, his memories of military training, his instinctive understanding of how to break people and systems. We became something greater than the sum of our parts. "Chen," I said, my voice echoing with power, "how many people like me have you killed? I don't know what you're talking about." "How many?" The energy exploded from me, and all the lights on the floor turned on simultaneously. 17, she admitted, backing away. 17 targets were terminated when they refused to cooperate. Magnus looked at me, and I saw something I hadn't seen in days, real anger. 17 families destroyed. 17 lives lost because you decided you had the right to play God. It was necessary for national security. "Silence," Magnus roared, and the sound carried so much authority that Chen instinctively took a step back. Through our connection, I could feel a plan forming in his mind. Not just to escape, not just to get revenge, but to ensure that the Prometheus Program could never hurt anyone again. "Kai," he said calmly, "can you access all of the city's electronic systems?" "Yes, including communication systems, the internet, government networks." I focused, extending my consciousness through Detroit's electrical infrastructure. "Yes, everything." Magnus smiled, and it was the first genuine smile I'd seen from him since his capture. "Then let's tell a story." What we did next changed everything. Using my ability to manipulate energy and his understanding of information systems, we simultaneously hacked into every government network, every television station, every social media platform, every communication system within a 1,000-kilometer radius, and we began broadcasting. Files from the Prometheus Program, photos of the laboratories, videos of experiments being conducted on people like me, names of agents, base locations, financial records showing how the program was being funded. Everything. "What are you doing?" Chen shouted, trying to reach a phone that no longer worked. "Transparency," Magnus said, "showing the world exactly what your government does in the shadows." Within minutes, the story was everywhere. Every news channel, every online Newspaper, every social media feed. It was impossible to suppress, impossible to contain. The truth about the Prometheus program spread like a digital virus, infecting every device connected to the internet. But we didn't stop there. "Chen," I said, walking toward her as energy danced around me. "You're going to do something for me." "What?" "You're going to call your superiors. You're going to tell them that the Prometheus program is over, effective now. All operations, all experiments, all hunting of people like me. It's over. I can't. You can and you will." Magnus joined me, and together we emanated a presence that made Chen back up until she was pressed against the wall. "Because if you don't, we'll use these same capabilities to expose every black program, every covert operation, every dirty secret this government holds. You wouldn't dare." "We dared to destroy a top-secret military facility and broadcast classified files to the entire world," I said. "What makes you think we wouldn't dare go further?" Chen looked between us, and I saw the moment when she realized she had no choice. She picked up a phone I had allowed to remain operational and dialed a number. "This is Chen." "Yes, sir, I understand that the situation has been compromised." "No, sir, containment is no longer possible." "Yes, sir, I recommend immediate termination of the program." She hung up and looked at us with pure hatred. "You have just committed treason against the United States of America." "No," Magnus said calmly. "We just saved the United States from itself." 6 months later, Detroit had become a completely different city. I was sitting on top of the same building from which I had observed the GM complex, but now I was looking at something very different. Where once there had been only ruins and desolation, now there were signs of real life. Construction, renovation, people on the streets who didn't seem haunted by the ghosts of the city's industrial past. Magnus joined me on the roof, carrying 2 coffees and wearing a suit that had miraculously survived the events of the past few months. He looked different now, still calculating, still dangerous, but there was a humanity in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Emotions are coming back," he said, handing me one of the coffees. "Slowly. It's strange, like relearning how to feel." "What do you mean?" "Yesterday I saw a child playing in the park and I felt something. Not love, not yet, but satisfaction, contentment." He shook his head. "It's hard to describe." I smiled. "That's how it starts. First you care about small things, then bigger things, and eventually I'll care about you again," he finished. "The question is, will you still want that after everything that's happened?" It was a fair question. The last 6 months had been complicated. Magnus was functionally a stranger relearning how to be human, and I was dealing with powers that grew stronger every day. Our friendship was being rebuilt from scratch, without the lies and manipulation that had characterized the first 5 years. "Yes," I said, "but this time, no secrets, no protection through deception. If we're going to do this, we do it as equals." "Equal," he repeated, as if testing the word. "I can live with that." Below us, Detroit continued. Its resurrection. The exposure of the Prometheus program had sent seismic waves through the federal government. Investigative commissions, mass firings, complete overhauls of intelligence programs. But more importantly, it had created public awareness of people like me. We were no longer urban myths or horror stories. We were citizens, human beings with rights, people who deserved protection instead of persecution. "Did you see the news today?" Magnus asked. "About the new legislation?" "Yes, the Protection Act for Supernatural Individuals passed the Senate by 72 votes. I laughed. Who would have guessed? Civil rights for people who can make fire with their hands. "It's a start," Magnus said, "but there's still work to be done. There are still groups like the Prometheus Program operating in the shadows. There are still people like you being hunted." It was true. Our victory had been significant, but it wasn't complete. Occasionally, we still received messages from desperate people asking for help. There were still organizations trying to capture and exploit people with supernatural abilities, but now we had the resources to help. "Is the Foundation working well?" I asked. Magnus nodded. "We saved 17 people last month, We provided them with secure identities, relocation, training to control their abilities, and some of them chose to stay and help others. The Prometheus Foundation, ironically named in honor of the program that had tried to destroy us, had become our answer to the organizations hunting our kind. We used the resources Magnus had acquired over the years, combined with my ability to access and manipulate electronic systems, to create a safety net for supernatural people. It was dangerous work, but it was our job. "There's a new situation," Magnus said, pulling a file from his briefcase. "A 16-year-old girl in Chicago. She can manipulate plants, make them grow or die with a touch. Her family turned her into the authorities when they found out." I sighed. Even with all the change, some things remained terribly familiar. "When do we leave?" "Tomorrow morning." "But Kai..." Magnus hesitated. "This one is different. She doesn't want to be saved. She believes she's a monster who deserves to be studied." "Then we'll have to convince her otherwise." Magnus smiled, and it was a smile that finally reached his eyes. "You've changed a lot since we first met." "How so?" 5 years ago, you would have rushed to Chicago immediately, with no plan, no thought. Now you're carefully considering how to approach the situation." "And you've changed too," I said. 5 years ago, you would have manipulated me into doing what you thought was best. Now you're telling me the truth and letting me make my own choice." "Growth," Magnus said. "Who would have thought?" We sat in silence for a while, watching Detroit transform in the late afternoon light. The smell of gasoline still wafted off me occasionally, but now it was different. It was no longer a sign of fear or uncontrolled anger. It was just part of who I was. "Supernatural youth," I muttered, and Magnus looked at me curiously. "Excuse me." "Nothing," I said, smiling. "Just thinking about how sometimes the best stories are about people finding their place in the world, even when that world seems determined to reject them." "And have you found your place?" I looked at Magnus, then at the city stretching out below us, then at the future we were building one rescue at a time. "Yes," I said. "I think I have." The sun set over Detroit, painting the sky with fiery colors. But this time, there was nothing destructive about those flames. They were the colors of renewal, of hope, of possibility. The smell of the storm had finally passed, leaving behind the sweet scent of a new beginning. And for the first time since I could remember, I was excited to see what came next. 5 years have passed since that night in the Prometheus Program lab. Detroit is now officially recognized as a sanctuary city, a place where people with supernatural abilities can live openly, work, build families, be simply normal. The abandoned industrial district has been transformed into a training center where young people like me learn to control their powers without fear. Magnus runs the Prometheus Foundation from a sleek office in the city center. His emotions have returned completely, and while he's still calculating and occasionally manipulative, there's now real love behind his actions. He'll never be completely normal, but he's managed to find a way of being human that works for him. As for me, I've become something I never thought possible: happy. It's not a simple happiness. I still carry the guilt for my family's death. I still have nightmares about the people we couldn't save in time. But it's a real happiness, built on solid foundations of purpose and genuine relationships. Today we saved our 200th person. A 30-year-old woman who can see through time, but only the tragic moments. She had spent a decade believing she was insane before we found her. "How do you do it?" she asked me when we explained that her visions were real. "How do you live knowing there is so much suffering in the world?" "By focusing on what I can change," I replied, "and by remembering that every person we save is a victory against those who tried to destroy us." Magnus smiled when he heard that. "You sound like a real hero now." "I'm no hero," I said. "I'm just someone who decided that being a monster was a choice, not a destiny. And that's it, supernatural youth. Sometimes the best stories aren't about becoming something different, but about accepting who you really are and finding a way to use that to make the world a little better." If this story inspired you, if it made you think about acceptance, about chosen family, about finding hope in the darkest places, then please like this episode and subscribe to the channel. Because there are many more stories to tell, and they all start with people like us. People who refuse to accept that being different means being a monster. Until the next storm, everyone. And remember, sometimes the best place to hide from the thunder is in the eye of the hurricane.